I call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, there is no more important investment any government can make than the investment that it makes in its people. And I would hope that that is something that there is universal agreement around the House about. I want to go back to the future a little bit, back to the past, to the Labour Party's heritage, and a quote from Peter Fraser and Clarence Beebe back in the 1930s when they stated, in revolutionising New Zealand's education system at the time, that the government's objective, broadly expressed, is that all persons, whatever their level of ability, whether they live in town or country, have a right as citizens to a free education of the kind for which they are best fitted and to the fullest extent of their powers. That vision that they articulated for our education system then, Mr Speaker, is just as relevant today as it was back when they were introducing universal free access to secondary school education, one of the lasting achievements of that first Labour government, because the Labour Party has always stood for quality, free public education, and we have had free, quality public education in New Zealand in the past, and we can have it again. Some other aspects of that quote that I want to pick up on, Mr Speaker, when they talked about of the kind for which they are best fitted. Fraser and Beebe recognised that one size does not fit all, and that there does need to be differentiation in the education system, as opposed to the standardised model that the current government preach, that suggests every child should learn the same thing at the same time, and that the education system should act effectively as a pipeline, a production line, as the Hekia Parata so regularly describes it. One size does not fit all. And we have had successive governments throughout New Zealand's history who have taken pride in boosting participation at all levels of our education, boosting participation in early childhood education, boosting participation in schooling, and boosting participation in tertiary education. I think now, for the first time in New Zealand's history, we have a government that is proud of lowering participation. Stephen Joyce actually boasts about the fact that there are fewer people in tertiary education, post-secondary school education now, than there were previously. That is the first time in New Zealand's history that we've had a government that has been proud of something like that. Because every other government, be they Labour or National-led, have been pushing to extend participation in all levels of the education system, and we've now got a government that is doing the opposite, that is actually trying to say we want fewer people in education, and I think that that says everything about this national government. There are contrasts abound when it comes to education. Let's look at the respective track records. I'm proud to be a member of a party that capped the cost of tertiary education, post-school education, as opposed to this government that has seen massive increases in the costs students face. I'm very proud to be part of a party that removed interest on student loans, as opposed to the government on the opposite side that cut eligibility for student loans, that extended access to student allowances, as opposed to the government on that side who have cut access to allowances. And I'm very, very proud to be part of a party that introduced a universal entitlement for every child, every 3- and 4-year-old in New Zealand, to 20 hours a week of free early childhood education and quality early childhood services. Of course, one of the first things that this national government did was cut the word free from the 20 hours a week of early childhood education. Very proud to be part of a party that consistently increased school funding so that parents weren't having to reach into their pockets as much to chip in all of the time for the costs of their kids' education, as opposed to this government, who have seen that money blow out to over $100 million a year that parents are now paying in supposedly voluntary donations for their kids' schooling. And that's the donations. On top of that, there are all the extra costs which parents now face, which this government are blind to, and technology is one of the biggest ones, and the current government seem to turn a blind eye to that. There are some brilliant initiatives happening around the country to ensure that kids can get access to the technological devices that they need for their schooling, and the government are doing nothing to pick those up and ensure that they are spread throughout the country. And now I want to turn to the big announcement that Andrew Little made in his State of the Nation speech, where he recommitted the Labour Party to the principle of free education and made a particular pledge to 3 years of free post-school education for all New Zealanders. And I think that that is very, very important, because let's just turn the clock back a little bit. There was a time when I was a long-haired student protesting about student debt and rising student fees. At the time, student debt was about to clock $3 billion. That seemed like a lot of money at the time. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to how much student debt is now? $15 billion is the total amount of student debt amassed. But now here's the interesting thing about student debt, is that since the student loan scheme was introduced, at no point has the government ever reached the stage where they collect more money in repayments than they are lending and borrowing every year, and they are not likely to do so at any time in the near future. In other words, every year we continue to lend out more money than we are recouping, and the student loan scheme has been in place for decades. The mountain of debt continues to grow, student tuition fees continue to grow, the average amount borrowed per student continues to grow, and this government simply turn a blind eye to that. We can do better than that, and introducing free post-school education is going to be an integral part of that agenda of the next Labour government. John Key decided to poo-poo that and say, oh, well, why should the waitress have to pay for the lawyer? Well, what if the waitress wants to be a lawyer? What if the waitress is actually working part-time while they are studying to be a lawyer, and they have ambition as well? And let's also remember that that waitress is part of a wider society. They receive the health care paid for from the taxes of others. They drive on roads paid for from the taxes of others. They will receive superannuation paid for from the taxes of others, and yes, they too will have access to a free education paid for from the taxes of others. That is called living in a society. We contribute to each other's welfare, and we don't simply look at our taxes as simply a personal contribution that we all benefit from only in personal terms. Our taxes are the contribution we pay for living in a civilised society, and our society benefits from higher levels of education. Then they tried to say, of course, that it was elitist, but they ignored the fact that it extends to all levels of post-school education, not just university students. We're talking about the people doing apprenticeships. We're talking about the people doing block trades courses in polytechnics. Those people will also benefit from 3 years of free post-school education under a future Labour government. And I think that that is a very good thing. Schooling is no longer enough. In the days of Fraser and Beebe, when they articulated that great vision, they were talking about schooling in the large part because that was a quantum leap then, extending free universal secondary school education. Well, that was then, this is now. Now we need more than just a secondary school education. And most New Zealanders know that. And to have Stephen Joyce taking to Twitter immediately afterwards and say that increasing participation in post-school education would achieve, and his exact words were, absolutely nothing, simply is an indictment on that government and the value that they place on education. We should have a free education. Education is opportunity. Education does provide the ladder in which people can reach their full potential, and it is an investment in our future. And for those who say that we cannot afford that, the answer quite simply is we cannot afford not to do that. We are reaching the point where, as Grant Robertson and Andrew Little have both pointed out, 46% of the current jobs that people in New Zealand do could become obsolete in the next few decades. We simply have to invest in education so that all New Zealanders have the opportunity to continue to be productive members of the society in which they live. So how is it that the government can find money to give away a farm, as Hekia Parata did when she funded the Whangaruru Charter School, effectively giving away a farm, but they can't find money for people who want to increase their skills through post-school education? They can find money for tax cuts, but they can't find money to invest in our country's future in a way that I think would be deliver far bigger returns to not only to the society as a whole, but also to the Crown. Because bear in mind, let's remember one simple fact, that the higher someone's level of education, the higher their average levels of earning, and the higher the tax they pay, so the more money that flows back to the Crown that does allow investment in those other public services that I have mentioned. So, Mr Speaker, I am very, very proud to be part of a Labour Party that is firmly fixed on the future, that is looking at investing in the future by investing in our people. That is what the next Labour government will be all about.